In a small, humble neighborhood nestled just on the outskirts of the city, a man named Ethan lived with his little daughter, Mia. Life had thrown its fair share of challenges at Ethan, and being a single father was never easy. He worked 2 jobs, barely earning enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. But despite the hardships, Ethan remained unbreakable. His daughter was his entire world, and her laughter made every struggle worthwhile. Mia, a bright and curious 6-year-old, was Ethan's biggest motivation. Every morning when Ethan kissed her goodbye before heading off to work, she would cheerfully wave from the window, her little hands pressing against the glass as she shouted, "Bye, Daddy, be a superhero today." And in many ways, Ethan was. He wasn't saving the world from villains, but he was fighting battles every day, against poverty, exhaustion, and uncertainty, all to give his daughter a better life. One particularly cold and rainy evening, Ethan was walking home after finishing his 2nd shift at the local warehouse. The rain came down in steady streams, and the streets glistened under the dim glow of streetlights. Ethan's boots splashed through puddles as he tightened his threadbare coat around himself, trying to fend off the chill. It had been a long, grueling day, and he was looking forward to seeing Mia's sleepy smile when he tucked her into bed. As he rounded a corner, he noticed something out of place. Under a flickering street lamp stood a young girl, no older than 10, huddled in a thin dress. Her small frame was soaked from the rain, and she looked terrified. Ethan's heart tightened. Why was a child out alone at this hour, in such terrible weather? He approached her slowly, his voice soft and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you okay? Where's your family?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and glistening with tears. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I'm lost. I don't know how to get home." Ethan felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. He could see the panic in her eyes and the way her small hands clutched at her arms, trying to stay warm. "It's all right," he said gently, kneeling to her level. "We'll figure this out together. What's your name?" "Sophie," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Okay, Sophie, don't worry. You're safe now. Let's get you somewhere warm first, and then we'll figure out how to get you home." Without a second thought, Ethan shrugged off his coat and draped it over Sophie's shoulders. The coat was far too big for her, but it provided some warmth. He held out his hand, and she hesitated for a moment before taking it. Together, they walked toward the small diner Ethan passed every day on his way to work. It was one of the few places still open at that hour. Inside the diner, the warm air was a welcome relief from the cold rain. Ethan guided Sophie to a booth in the corner and waved over a waitress. "Can we get a hot chocolate for her, please?" he asked, pulling out his wallet. He had just a few crumpled bills left, but it didn't matter. Sophie needed it more than he did. The waitress brought over the hot chocolate, and Sophie wrapped her small hands around the mug, savoring its warmth. Ethan watched her, his mind racing with questions. How had she ended up alone? Where were her parents? "Do you remember your address?" he asked gently. "Or maybe a phone number I can call?" Sophie shook her head, looking down at the table. "I was with my nanny," she said quietly. "We went to the mall, but I got lost. I don't know how to get back." Ethan nodded, trying to think of the best way to help. "It's okay," he said. "We'll figure it out. Do you remember anything about where you live? Maybe the name of your street or a nearby park?" After a moment of thought, Sophie's face lit up. "There's a big park near my house. It has a fountain in the middle and lots of trees." Ethan knew the park she was talking about. It was on the other side of town, a long walk from where they were. Public transportation wasn't an option this late, and Ethan didn't have enough money for a cab. But that didn't matter. He couldn't leave her stranded. "All right," he said with a reassuring smile. "I know where that is. Let's get you home." Sophie's eyes lit up with hope, and she nodded. Ethan paid for the hot chocolate with the last of his money and led Sophie outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was still cold and damp. Ethan tightened the coat around Sophie and held her hand as they began the long walk to her neighborhood. As they walked, Ethan did his best to keep Sophie's spirits up. He told her stories about Mia, about how she loved to draw pictures of superheroes and dreamt of becoming one herself. Sophie listened intently, her fear slowly fading as she realized she was in good hands. Ethan smiled, relieved that their journey was almost over. He walked Sophie to the front door of a grand house with lights still on inside. Before he could knock, the door swung open, and a woman rushed out, her face a mixture of panic and relief. "Sophie!" the woman cried, pulling the girl into her arms. "Oh, thank God, we've been so worried!" Sophie clung to the woman, who Ethan assumed was her nanny. "He helped me," she said, pointing to Ethan. "He brought me home." The woman looked up at Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Ethan smiled modestly. "I'm just glad she's safe. That's all that matters." As Ethan turned to leave, a black luxury car pulled up to the house. A man stepped out, his suit immaculate despite the late hour. He looked at Sophie, then at Ethan. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. The nanny quickly explained what had happened, and the man's expression softened. He walked over to Ethan and extended his hand. "I'm Sophie's father. Thank you for bringing her home. You've done more for us tonight than I can put into words." Ethan shook his hand, feeling a little out of place in his damp clothes and worn-out boots. "It's no problem, really. I'm just glad she's safe." The man studied Ethan for a moment before saying, "Wait here." Ethan watched as Sophie's father disappeared into the house. Moments later he returned, holding an envelope. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Ethan. "It's not nearly enough to repay you for what you've done, but I hope it helps." Ethan hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside was a check with an amount that made his breath catch. It was more money than he made in a year. He looked up, stunned. "I can't accept this." "Please," the man insisted. "You didn't just help my daughter tonight, you saved her. This is the least I can do." Ethan nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. As he walked home that night, the rain had stopped, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. Back at home, Mia was fast asleep, her little hand clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Ethan kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're going to be okay, baby girl. We're going to be okay." Share your thought in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into crafting stories like this for you, and your support is the one helps me keep going. I appreciate having you on this journey,